Okay, before we start, this is being videotaped, so the camera is right in the middle, so if I can just ask this pathway here, and we'll be all set.
Thanks, Fred. We were trying to replicate the USTR staff meeting experience by having problems with the audio. But yeah, thanks. Now we'll take reports from all the offices on what you've been doing since we last gathered. I'm Heather Hurlbert, Ambassador Tai's Chief of Staff, and my job is to welcome you to this 60th birthday party. And just to preview for you that we will hear from Ambassador Tai, and then we will hear some stories and escapades from her many illustrious predecessors who were here. And so it's my job to get out of the way of our wonderful current occupant who really incorporates the history in her both career and political background and her unanimous Senate confirmation, incarnating the past and the future of USTR, Ambassador Tai.
First of all, let me thank all of you for coming and showing your support for USTR, for our agency, for our people, and for our mission and our mandate. Friends, colleagues in the administration, the cabinet, former U.S. trade representatives, Mr. Brady, well, there you are, ambassadors, advisory committee chairs, my fellow USTR teammates, thank you so much for coming for our 60th birthday celebration. In many Asian cultures, 60 years marks a full life cycle, and the 60th birthday is celebrated as a particularly important milestone, so because it symbolizes an end to one round and the start to another. So today, as we celebrate USTR's first 60 years, we also celebrate the beginning of the next 60. This is a birthday party, not a retirement party. Either way, the soda and the snacks and this incredible cake with the USTR seal on it, which I'm really, really impressed by, is on us, and I hope that you will enjoy. I don't know if any of you has been around quite long enough to remember Senator Bartlett of Alaska, and it's very possible that some of you actually do. But I like to invoke Senator Bartlett when we are thinking about ourselves as an agency to recall that our origins as the U.S. Trade Representative's Office goes all the way back to the 1950s and the 1960s when members of Congress began to express concern over a lack of regard for the effects of our trade policy through the lens of foreign policy on the livelihoods of their constituents. So famously, Senator Bartlett said in 1962, and I quote, "I do not think it is fair, I do not think it is just to place upon the Bristol Bay fishermen the burdens of our international commitments to this nation." And that is the year that Congress transferred the trade negotiations function out of the State Department to USTR. Ever since that fateful year, we have been faithful as an institution to our mandate, which sometimes may feel like is interpreted as being a royal pain in the butt for many, many people, including many, if not most of you. Let me explain. This is actually by design. This is how we were created. Thank you very much. I'm sure that many of you have roamed Winder's brick halls, and you can relate. What we do is hard. It's technical, it's detailed, and we get constantly pulled in a million directions. And that's because we are constructed to sit at this thorny intersection between powerful forces, where foreign policy intersects with domestic economic policy, where the executive branch intersects with the legislative. We were made to get things done, and the work that we do matters to our international relations, to the Congress, and to the American people. I love this place so much, as many of you know my history, that I had to come back. When I left USTR in 2014, I was primarily a WTO litigator. The only outstanding dispute that we still had in 2014 with the European Union was a pair of disputes, Boeing and Airbus. When I got back in 2021, I was reviewing the WTO disputes file and discovered that the disputes between the US and the EU had again proliferated at the WTO. And of course, we have spent a lot of the past 2 years making a lot of progress in repairing our relations with all of our friends, including those across the Atlantic. As Ambassador Lambrinidis said, I'm paraphrasing him, we are getting back to making history together and not just headlines, although at this very moment I think we are probably doing both. All this is to say that USTR is special, and not just when we issue our special 301 report. All right, those are the groans I was expecting. Administrations change. People come and go, certainly USTRs come and go, but there are some uniquely USTR-y things that are constant and noteworthy. There are USTR rites of passage, and I have often, in my previous incarnation at USTR and back again at the agency, imagined, and one of these days we may actually get around to implementing this, giving out merit badges for specific USTR experiences for our teams to gather. So, for example, your first consultation in Geneva, your first FTA negotiation, or your first MOU signing, the first time Commerce steals one of your events, the first time you make an interagency colleague cry, or your first angry call from the NSC. Or maybe it's your first trip to Geneva, your first congressional subpoena, or your first fight with Treasury. Maybe it's the trade alphabet soup of acronyms. That is a bit of a rite of passage for those who come into our world. You can probably string together multiple sentences that are just littered with ABCDs. One of my close team members last night, and I will not identify who this person is, confessed that every time this person hears us say ADCVD, they think that we are just saying ABCDE. I think that we have all of the foreign policy acronyms and the domestic policy ones too. The only ones that we don't have yet are the Pentagon ones, and you may have noticed we are working on acquiring those soon also. Even though we have a well-earned reputation for being 250 lawyers or lawyer types, and with some economists thrown in, that endlessly argue and negotiate amongst ourselves, I know that we as an agency have some of the smartest and most dedicated people in Washington serving our country and solving some of our toughest problems. At his swearing in, at his ceremony in 1962, the first special representative for trade negotiations, as this position was called then, Christian Herter, pledged to carry out his responsibilities in a way to bring together the nations of the free world so that they in concert may become a great force for freedom. And I think that those words still resonate very strongly with us today, 60 years later. And in a similar spirit, we are dedicated not just to becoming a great force for freedom, but also putting humanity back into the trade, both outside and inside the building. So whether it's enforcing worker rights under the USMCA, putting sustainable and inclusive prosperity front and center in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework negotiations and our talks with Kenya and Taiwan, or our work with the EU through the TTC and the TALD, here I go with the acronyms, we are laser focused on delivering real outcomes on issues that directly affect working people here at home and around the world. We are also placing an emphasis on historically underrepresented and marginalized communities that rightfully have a say in what our trade policy should look like. Putting people at the center also means doing this within the Winder building. And here I want to give a special call out to our DEA Council. That's the Diversity, Equity, Inclusiveness, and Accessibility Council. The council launched itself here at USTR. It was truly a grassroots effort by dedicated USTR staffers who have been thinking about diversity, equity, inclusivity, and access issues at USTR for a long time. And as much as we celebrate USTR for all the things that we are, we also celebrate all of those things that we strive to be more of. The DEA Council has been leading the way to embed these values in all facets of the USTR ecosystem, from hiring to training to how we work even better as a team. And it shows that the USTR is really like family. Through all the late nights, the countless red-eye flights, this place truly gives us a special bond. I also want to recognize the two longest-serving USTR staffers. They are Bennett Harmon and Deborah Tidwell, who together, when you combine their USTR experience, actually eclipse the 60 years of existence of this agency. And I think that the number is 65, 33, and 32, respectively. These are the people who make up the institution. I want to say in closing that USTR is a very special place. We are fighters, we are believers, we work incredibly hard, and we strive to continue to be the best pains in the butt imaginable for all of you, for the sake of writing a news story on trade and advancing our trade policy through the many challenges we face today and for a brighter tomorrow. Thank you very much. Happy birthday to USTR. I think 60 has never looked so good. And next, what I would like to do is to recognize each of the former USTRs who have graced us with their participation today. I will call on you in chronological order. I will be testing my recall of how your portraits appear in the hallway on the second floor of the USTR building, and invite you to share with everyone here a story about USTR, your experiencing leading this agency, which is small, mighty, lean, and mean. So Carla, that means that you are up first. Ambassador Carla, the Crowbar Hills. Thank you.
Well, let me start by saying happy birthday to everyone connected with USTR, and to thank Catherine Tai for bringing this group together to commemorate this wonderful occasion. Now, I was told a day ago that I should give a snippet on a trip that I remembered that might have made a difference. And I thought about it, and the trip I remember most was to Baltimore. And let me give you just a little bit of background. We were in the closing days, I hoped, of winding up the NAFTA. And my good friends, Jaime Serra from Mexico, who has remained my good friend, and Mike Wilson from Canada, who unfortunately we've lost him, he passed away. But we were meeting in August of '92, and I said, I've locked the doors, no one can leave until we complete this negotiation, because we have to get it done before the '92 election. And things were going very smoothly until we hit a rut. And Mike was furious, and he slammed out of the room, and we were at the Watergate Hotel in a conference room, and we looked out the window, and there was Mike walking around, and we knew he was upset. I called my staff and I said, I think I got a problem. I think we need to take a couple of hours off. Is the Kennedy Center open for a concert? Is there something that could just lower the temperature and people would enjoy? They got back to me and said, the Kennedy Center is dark, no chance. I said, well, what could I do? And they said, well, you could go up to Baltimore and go to the baseball game. My husband loved baseball, but that was not my forte. And so I said, okay. So we went to Baltimore, where the Toronto Blue Jays, who were the love of Mike Wilson, were playing the Baltimore Orioles. And one of the very generous people in the advisory committee, the President's Advisory Committee on Trade, had a box and gave us 3 seats in the box, which included dinner. And, Mike was thrilled to be there. So that was a good point. And, but then Ame said to me about halfway through, don't you think we've had enough? We've been staying up so late. And I said, look at Mike. He's loving it. He said, okay. And he came back to me before dessert was served and said, do you think we could leave? And I went over to Mike and I said, I think Ame's tired. Do you think we could leave? Well, we finally negotiated that. And so the 3 of us stepped out of the box, and if you know, there's a door, and you're in a corridor, and suddenly there was this outrageous applause. And Mike said, we've missed something. It turned out that we missed the triple play that the Toronto Blue Jays had secured. And in my heart, I was really worried. I thought, I'll get back there tomorrow. If we think he was marching around in disgust yesterday, how about tomorrow? And we joined together the next day, and Mike was pretty pleased. And we got through the negotiation, and we solved all the problems. We stood up and we shook hands. And he said, you know, Toronto won. And I thought to myself, well, we've had a triple play here too. And so with that, we got the agreement.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Carla Hills. Ambassador Portman, I think this means you're up next. You're next, yeah?
Well, Catherine, thank you. And first of all, you guys don't look a day over 59. It's great to be here. I love USTR. Some of you know I get asked now again, what was your favorite job? And I haven't been able to keep a job, so I've had a number of them. And I always say, you know, the one I enjoyed the most was USTR. And it really relates to the people in this room, and some of whom are now too busy negotiating to be in this room today, but it's just an incredible team. So I thank you for your service and for giving me an experience of a lifetime to be able to join with you and stay in touch with so many of you. I was driving over here from the airport thinking, you know, there are a lot of stories that I could tell, but most of them involve somebody in this room, so I can't do it. When I was first appointed and then confirmed as USTR, there was a conference that had already been scheduled in Paris, and it was to determine the way to calculate ad valorem tariffs. And I'm sure somebody in this room is an expert on that. I can't even remember what ad valorem tariffs were, much less how to calculate them. So I boned up on it, and they shipped me over to Paris for this meeting, and it was a very intense meeting, but at the end of the day, we found nearly a consensus on a very difficult agriculture issue, these ad valorem tariffs, and how we would deal with them. The one outlier was Japan, and they were insistent. And so remember Ambassador Nakagawa, who was the trade minister at the time. He was fine, but his ag minister was not. He was very disgruntled and very unhappy. and insistent that he was not going to agree. He was an older gentleman who'd been around a while, very gruff. So I figured, here I am, you know, the great negotiator, I'll go one-on-one with him, and it'll all be solved. So I went downstairs where we're in the conference room. We had a small conference room together, and we engaged in a little small talk before starting to talk about this and bring in the rest of the team. And so we had a translator, and for those of you who remember back in the day, I hope it's not true today, State was always unwilling to provide us translators. We had to pay for our own. And our translators were not always great, let's just be honest. And I think we hadn't paid this one very much. And so we're talking, and I say, you know, I'm here in Paris. My wife is actually with me on this trip because it's her birthday. Found that interesting. And then, you know, he told me some things about his family. And I thought, okay, we've softened this up a little bit. Let's bring in the teams. And so our team comes in, his team comes in, the EU came in with us, and, you know, it was about to be a very intense negotiation. So I started saying, you know, Mr. Minister, this is why we all feel so strongly, and we have and he put his hand up like this. Stop. So I stopped. The room quieted, and he said in a booming voice, in Japanese, so no one could understand it except the few Japanese speakers in the room, something very declarative. And his team looked surprised. And then our translator translated what he had said. Ladies and gentlemen, I feel strongly about this issue, but Ambassador Portman has just told me that he is here in Paris on his honeymoon. And as a special gift to Senator Ambassador Portman on his honeymoon, I will acquiesce to this terrible policy. So I feel guilty about this story to this day. This is one of these stories where this has been embargoed, folks, for 15 years. So my team looks at me. You know, they know I've got 3 kids. I'm married 20 years. Wondering what I'm going to say. I bow slightly to the minister. I pick up my papers, and I leave the room. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Ambassador Schwab, please.
Thank you, Ambassador Tai. Thank you very much. I have to start actually by thanking all the people in this room who made our tenure, my tenure, successful, kept me from looking really stupid at times. Particular thanks to Ambassador Portman, to Mr. Brady, and I know Secretary Becerra, I suspect he left, but also Secretary Becerra, who was on the Hill at the time and was very important. I started my career, my first job ever was as a GS nothing baby ag negotiator at USTR. And my last job in government was as Catherine's predecessor, and like my colleagues, a very, very important part of my life. So I'm going to tell an anecdote and draw some lessons about what I've learned and what I learned over the years, and in some cases what I've taught at the University of Maryland about the Trade Representative's Office. And this has to do with the U.S.-Oman Free Trade Agreement. And if the Omani ambassador is here, is the Omani ambassador here? Okay, then good. So apologies in advance if this is embarrassing. The former Omani ambassador was a wonderful woman by the name of Hunaina Al-Mughari, and some of you may remember her. She was magnificent. And the agreement was concluded under Ambassador Portman remotely. And as all of you know, the unpleasant little secret about negotiating with the Americans free trade agreements is that there are actually multiple negotiations, and you've got the negotiation to get the agreement negotiated or launched, then you've got the negotiation of the agreement, then you have to get it through the Congress, and Ambassador Al-Mughari worked the Congress like no ambassador I've ever met. And then you've got the entry into forced negotiation, which is the nasty little secret that a lot of people don't get, which is, yes, we've signed this deal, but if it isn't in your laws and regulations, it's not self-executing, so we have to negotiate that too. So we concluded the Oman Free Trade Agreement. Ambassador Portman left. I had to get it through the Congress. Went through the Senate, no problem. We got to the House, actually started in the House. So 27 minutes into a 15-minute roll call vote, Duncan Hunter is holding us hostage for he and a buddy who I won't name because the buddy is still in Congress, was holding us hostage over something that had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with trade, but it didn't matter. I needed 2 votes, and he had them. And I ended up having to call Steve Hadley, who was National Security Advisor, to negotiate with Mr. Hunter to work the deal out. So I got the 2 votes. It went through. Yay. Deal got enacted into law. That was 2006. I'm on my way out in 2009, and there is one free trade agreement where we haven't concluded the entry into force agreement, and that's the Oman FTA. And we're thinking, oh my God, we can't leave this for our successors. We need to get this done. And the Commerce Minister, the Omani Commerce Minister, who was the guy who negotiated the deal in the first place, had been empowered to negotiate the deal, but once it came time to do the implementing, all the other ministers who weren't happy about the deal in the first place, particularly on environment and labor, said, not going to happen. So our team was there and went back and forth trying to work it out. We had to do something, so I had nothing better to do in January of 2009, prior to the 20th. Get on a plane, go to Oman, try to work things out. Clearly nothing was going to happen. So the only answer was call on the Sultan. And this is the former Sultan, the late Sultan, who was absolutely magnificent. Hour and a half into the desert, driving into the desert for an hour and a half to visit his palace. Sat down with him, and many of you may know he was a real Renaissance man, and he talked about the Oman Symphony and the Muscat Chamber Orchestra and the architecture of the mosque in Muscat. And if any of you ever go to Muscat, it is absolutely amazing. Wonderful, wonderful country. So he's doing all this really important, talking about these important things, and I'm thinking, I need to tell him what my problem is, and it's just going to sound so boring and so basic, but I really need this help. So we finished an hour and a half, and I figure, okay, 90 seconds, I can do this in 90 seconds. And I got 30 seconds into my explanation, and he says, stop, I'll take care of it. 24 hours later, the team reports back, it's done. And I thought, I've learned some lessons here. So here are the lessons drawn from this anecdote. 1, trade policy making, trade negotiations, trade politics, it is a team sport. 2, if you're USTR, you spend as much time negotiating with your own side as you do with the other side. 3, if you're not capable of putting yourself in the other person's shoes, you're not going to get to yes. And finally, your obligation is to leave the place in a better situation than when you found it for your successor. And it is a wonderful organization indeed, and thank you for having this wonderful event.
Ambassador Ron Kirk.
Ambassador Schwab, thank you. Ambassador Tai, thank you all. Happy birthday. So good to see so many friends. Congressman Brady, my neighbor, Tom Vilsack, who I had a chance to serve with, so many others. It is impossible to distill this to a favorite story. I won't tell my favorites because they all involve Matt Rhodes, Pascal Lamy, and single malt scotch. So you can take it from there. But to tell you Matt had a love affair with the very esteemed Director General of the WTO at that time would be an understatement. And Matt spent most of his time instructing me in ways to get under Pascal Lamy's skin, which I joyfully accepted. But I'm going to use a different story because there are just so many memories, but still one thing stands out for me more than any, and it was after we had, as a team, taken the baton from Sue Schwab and her team and successfully gained congressional passage of the Korea Colombia, and Panama trade agreements. And so the White House was a little bit miffed about whether we'd make a big deal about it or no deal about it, but ultimately President Obama intervened and we had a great celebration of it. And so when we finally got to signing of the bills, we had a ceremony in the Oval Office. It's the first time I had the privilege to do that. It's the first time that my wife ventured up from Texas to join me for that. And so you all know the pictures. We're all around, huddled around the desk. President Obama's there. All of the chairmen are there. The committee people are there. And I look over in the corner, and my wife is standing by the door in tears. I mean, not even trying to restrain herself, just crying her eyes out. So we finished the ceremony, bid everybody goodbye. I went over to her and I said, honey, what's wrong? She said, nothing's wrong. She said, this is a moment I could have never dreamed of. And she told me a story about coming over here from Cleveland, Ohio, when her grandmother was a little girl, when black people couldn't go in and take tours of the White House. And here we were standing in the Oval Office in one of the most important moments. And I say that because it reminded me of something a great friend and mentor of mine, who Kevin knows, Don Evans, who served as Secretary of Commerce under President Bush, who called me along with Henry Cisneros, who was a fellow mayor, another Texan, every day for 2 weeks after President Obama nominated me to be trade rep. And Don called, he congratulated me. He said, how can I help? You're gonna love this. And he said, okay, forget all that other stuff about trade and that. Take everybody you know to lunch at the White House. Because at some point, this is just a job. We're here irritating commerce, fighting with the White House. He said, but every time you bring somebody new, you get to be reminded through their eyes how privileged we are to be in this space. And for a kid who grew up in the segregated South, whose parents couldn't vote, to look around this room now, and I saw our Interior Secretary here, and I see Tom Vilsack, and you mentioned Congressman Becerra, for all of us to be blessed to serve our country, to travel the world, to have the world see the United States through our diversity, through our beauty, through Ambassador Tai, is a special and privileged moment. So I shared that story with you just as a reminder on those days when you're most frustrated, you know, fighting with our friends, fighting with the White House. Just take a moment and reflect how honored, how privileged we are to be able to occupy this space. So, Ambassador, thank you for having us. Thanks for letting me share this moment.
Ambassador Froman.
Well, that is, as always, a hard act to follow. So I'm not going to try. I have no wisdom like that to impart. I'm going to take the privilege of being last to actually tell two travel stories. First, and I'm not sure anybody in this room was with me when we went to Africa for the AGOA Forum in Gabon, and very much focused on trade and environment. We took a day at the end of the AGOA Forum and went down to see the forest elephants in this special park that they had. And the president was kind enough to give us his helicopter to take us down there. We met with these French legionnaires, these incredibly macho French legionnaires who've been sent to Gabon to train the anti-poaching team, and then we went out on safari, effectively. And my staff used to tease me, you know, just one more bilat, just one more meeting, just one more tree we got to go see or something. Well, we ended up missing the appointment with the helicopter on the way back, and the helicopter couldn't find us, and it got dark. And the Legionnaires are trying to figure out what are they going to do. There are about 10 of us there, and they're trying to make arrangements for us to spend the night with them in their tents. We were with the Secret Service, as we tend to travel with Secret Service when we were abroad. The Secret Service was going crazy. In fact, one of them was going crazy, Kim, a woman who often traveled with us. She had to go to the bathroom. And there we were in the field. And I have this picture of her with this roll of toilet paper heading towards the forest. And of course, we're there to see the forest elephants. And so we're all wondering, what's she going to meet in the forest? And is she going to be safe? But she was safe. She made it back. It was dark. We're driving in the dark. And there, in the middle of the road in front of us, is a giant pangolin, which is a very rare animal, actually an endangered species. And the Legionnaires and actually one of our team, Trevor Kincaid, got out, wrestled the pangolin to the ground so we could all take a look at it. And finally, the president did send his helicopter back, and they found us, and we made it home safely. So a little bit of trade and environment in action. Kudos to the Secret Service for not going crazy and, being somewhat, innovative on the road. The last story I'll tell, and there is a little bit of a lesson here, was soon after I became USTR, we had our first TPP ministerial, and it was in Brunei. The Brunei ambassador is in here. No. It turns out Brunei is far away. And in fact, to get home from Brunei, you take 3 8-hour flights. Brunei to Dubai, Dubai to London, London, home. We're at the ministerial. It goes on for 4 or 5 days. We haven't slept in 2 or 3 days. Half the ministers are on the flight from Brunei to Dubai, because it's the only way out of the country. We get on the plane. They all go to first class. We go to coach. Because, among other things, it was sequestration, and we had no money. And we decided, rather than buying any business class tickets, we'd get more of our staff to be able to go to the negotiation. And the other trade ministers were both somewhere between in awe and in sort of disbelief that the United States would have to travel 24 hours back to Washington in coach. And I mention that story because one of the things I love about USTR, and you've heard it here in different ways, it's small, it's scrappy, it's the most dedicated staff, the most hardworking staff, the hardest working trade negotiators in the world. I see our Canadian ambassador here, who was our counterpart there, but I would say the US worked even harder. And I have so much respect for the career staff and the political appointees over the years who made this place great and who will continue to make it great for the next 60 years. Thank you.
To all of my distinguished predecessors. Now, Bob Lighthizer wasn't able to join us because he's traveling, but I believe that Jeff Garish, Deputy USTR to Bob Lighthizer, there you are. Please, Ambassador Garish, I'd like to invite you up to share a story from your time at USTR. Thank you. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you, Ambassador Ty, and I want to thank you and everyone at USTR for the opportunity to be here. And certainly there are a number of stories, of course, I can tell, like the former USTRs that have shared their stories, many funny and interesting stories. The one I'll share with you is from one of my trips to Papua New Guinea. And you heard that right. I had not only one, but 2 trips to Papua New Guinea in my first 8 months at USTR. And the second of those trips was for the leaders meeting for APAC. And at the leaders meeting, the vice president was representing the United States, but he happened to be tied up in bilats, and I was asked to attend one of the events on his behalf. So I, of course, went to this event, and in the green room before the event was sitting next to none other than Prime Minister Abe of Japan and President Duterte from the Philippines, and of course a number of other leaders there. We had a very nice, cordial, interesting discussion. Went to the event, and then we broke out into separate breakout sessions where we were to talk about different trade issues. And we were each presented with a question on the importance of digital trade and the benefits of digital trade and what it meant for each of our respective countries. And so we went around the room and, of course, provided my response. And eventually it came to one of the other leaders, who was a leader of an Asian country. I won't specifically mention who, but he proceeded to give his response to the question on digital trade. But then he just turned completely in my direction, and he said, "I have a question for the United States." And he proceeded to launch into this grievance that he had against the United States, which, of course, it had nothing whatsoever to do with digital trade, and in fact didn't relate to trade at all. And I, of course, listened and very intently and politely, and there was an APEC Business Advisory Council member who was with me, and she very helpfully at one point said, "You don't need to respond to that." And I could assure you now, and I certainly assured her then, I had no intention whatsoever to respond to what he was saying. But it did confirm for me that I, of course, had to always be ready for anything and everything at USTR, and there would never be a dull moment. And my entire time at USTR confirmed that. It was a thrilling, interesting, fulfilling experience, and one I will never forget. And of course, the other thing that I will never forget are the people at USTR, the wonderful, outstanding public servants we have that I was fortunate enough to work with every day. And you know, the people at USTR are amazingly talented and smart, and hardworking and dedicated and committed. In fact, the level of commitment and sacrifice among the people at USTR is on par with anything I've ever seen in the private sector. We all can tell stories about people literally working around the clock on negotiations and other big efforts that the agency had. During the China negotiations, I had people sleeping on the couch outside in the room outside my office, and it was truly amazing to see that day in and day out. And I think if the American people could see the level of commitment and dedication and sacrifice that everyone at USTR shows, they really would feel fortunate for really the incredible people we have working there. And I feel fortunate and honored and privileged to have been able to serve along with them and to have been part of the truly glorious history of this great institution. So thank you very much, and thank you again, Ambassador.
Thank you so much. We have a beautiful cake that I know folks will want to get into, but before we do that, I hope you all will indulge me in inviting one more speaker to the podium, and that's Mr. Brady. Mr. Brady, you are the representative for the U.S. Congress today. I think that, it's a fly-in day, I think it is. Please? Please. All right. And so I would love for you to come and, again, want to recognize that you introduced me at my Senate confirmation hearing. We worked together closely on Ways and Means, and I'm just very conscious of the fact that USTR is this creation, this child of Congress and the executive, and it would be honored for you to share some words too.
Thank you, Ambassador,
Thank you.
very much. I'll be very brief. One of my jobs was to wrangle the votes for trade for many years. So I have lots of stories, none of which will be told today. What I will say is this is an agency with a remarkable record. We always felt in Congress, Rob, that this was an agency that punched way above its weight, that there was just a special culture here, a devotion to trade agreements and disputes and finding smart, creative ways to resolve issues in an environment where, as the Ambassador said, it intersects politics and history and economy and self-interest and the market itself. And it's just fascinating. To me, trade is absolutely fascinating. But I have always been so impressed with the USTR. The leaders we've had have been so remarkable and thankfully so bipartisan, willing to work with any of us who believe in the freedom to trade. But the hours you put in, the effort you make, and the results of USTR over 60 years is nearly immeasurable for our country, and I'd argue for the world as well. So for me, it's really a blessing to have been involved, and I hope I continue to be involved in free trade. But for you in this room today, you ought to be very proud of this first 60 years. And I'm very optimistic about the next as well. But congratulations on just a wonderful achievement. Thank you.
What I want to do is to thank the team that put this event together. We knew that the 60th was coming up, and the last couple of years, planning and logistics have been particularly challenging. But this beautiful room with its history, the friends and family, professional family, international family that we have brought together, Thank you so much for all of your dedication in the past, for today, and into the future. Secretary Vilsack, thank you for coming. One of my closest partners in the administration. And with that, I would like to invite all of you to enjoy the aforementioned cake and snacks that we have available. And please, just continue to soak up the incredible energy that we have here today. Again, thank you for coming to support us.